Why have you been carrying a CO2 monitor around with you the last 6 months, and what have you learnt by doing that?
I've learned that we live in a CO2 cesspit most of the time in interior environments. Outside environment is, CO2 is going up. You can believe that or not believe it. And it is one of the main causes of climate change. You can believe that or not believe it, but there are thousands of scientific studies showing that. So we've established that. Doesn't seem like, unless you're, someone who is extremely apprehensive about data measurements, right? There's not a lot of controversy with it, but indoor CO2 levels, I would call this an epidemic. It is so deplorable. And I had heard about this a long time ago and didn't do anything about it because I was just like, I don't need to be worried about something else. But finally, I got a CO2 monitor and started recording hotels, subways, bars, gyms, airplanes, and was absolutely horrified by what I've found. And what I've found is that we are spending most of our time in areas that have lower oxygen, that have higher CO2, and this is impacting our ability to think. It's affecting our bodies. It's affecting our sleep and more.
Yeah. And so I know you've mentioned airports, airplanes, hotel rooms, windows not being able to be open. Can you just give us a little sample of like what is a good CO2 level and what starts to happen once it goes? What's the numbers we should, if we're so inclined to get one of these CO2 monitors, what numbers would we start to be a bit concerned about?
So outside, the CO2 levels, like what today, 418 parts per million, 419, it's going up every year, right? Inside, anything below 1,000 is considered good, right? Some people at 800 parts per million will experience some eye irritation, sore throat, that kind of thing. Anything above 1,200, 1,500, there was one study showing that at 1,500, a lot of people get headaches, they feel dizzy. A study of 24 employees showed that cognitive scores went down 50% when participants were exposed to CO2 levels of 1,400 parts per million or higher. 50% decline. These are real studies done by real researchers, and everything is accessible to everyone if you want to look it up yourself. So beyond that, a lot of bars and pubs are at around 2,500 parts per million, which means 1 in 17 breaths is someone else's breath backwash. And then it just gets worse from there. I'll stop there unless you want to go deeper and deeper.
So I'm just curious, like, so you took a 30% CO2 breath, I think you referenced in the book, or a couple of those, and I'm just going to paraphrase a bit here, so please correct me as I go through this. That can and will help your CO2 tolerance levels. When we're in a high CO2 environment, it's toxic. What's going on with this? Is it right to call it like an exogenous CO2 versus what our bodies produce? And what differences are going on there?
Yeah, it's so confusing. And just to be clear, I don't know all the answers in the CO2 world, and I'm actively trying to figure all of this out. So what I did with Dr. Justin Feinstein is I took one breath of CO2, right? So 30% CO2, one breath, which can help reset the brain, the nervous system, and more. We've known this for more than 100 years, that CO2 therapy is possibly the most effective therapy for anxiety, for panic, and for many other conditions. So we know that. That's one breath. I'm talking about breathing in and out for 8, 10, 12, 16 hours a day in an environment with very high CO2. And if there is high CO2, there is almost always lower oxygen, right? Those two things are almost always in parallel. You could probably get into an environment where you have higher CO2. As long as the oxygen is up, it could be really beneficial. But I think what is happening most of the time is it's lower oxygen, higher CO2, and you're just inhaling everyone else's exhalations. And we purge 70% of our toxins with our breath, with our exhalations. So you just imagine for a couple hours, I'm sure it's completely fine, 1,500 parts per million, even 2,000 parts per million. But every single day, over and over, and this is really impacting our health, and no one's talking about it.
Incredible. Yeah, I've been very conscious of that since I heard you talk about it on Diary of the CEO, and I noticed my hotel rooms didn't open. But I was in Denver Airport a few months ago, and they have the CO2 levels on the wall, which I found quite interesting. So somebody's paying attention to it, which is pretty cool.
That is incredible. And that's what I hope will happen. So one day, I think if enough people get these CO2 monitors and start outing hotels that have hermetically sealed their window, you can't even open a window if you want. It's summertime. It's beautiful out. Can't open a window. And they're just recycling the air over and over because it helps them save a little bit of money on their energy bill, right? At the cost of our health. So I think if enough people start complaining, businesses are going to do something about this. And
Yeah.
that's what's, the government's not going to do anything about it, at least this government here in the US, but maybe in other governments in other countries. And I know private companies want to respond to customers. And
Yeah.
don't start checking CO2 on long flights because it's an absolute disaster.
Incredible. I worked for a corporation for years, and I was like a productivity coach, and we would try everything. No one ever spoke about CO2 levels, and we had 2,000 people in a building. So I would be shocked if it had good CO2 levels in there, but fascinating. Okay, breath holds and human growth hormone. What is human growth hormone? Why should we be interested in that? And what are breath holds doing? Why are they increasing it?
I mean, you look at something like human growth hormone. This is produced in the pituitary gland, and it plays a crucial role in health. It stimulates growth of cells, cell reproduction and regeneration, metabolism regulation, stimulation of muscle growth, bone density, blah, 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 blah. It's so important. And so this idea that just holding your breath for 30 seconds or more can stimulate more human growth hormone, I think is just fantastic. And I had heard this from various people, specifically Ben Greenfield mentioned it to me years ago, that he said, I read this study about how breath holding from 30 seconds or more can stimulate human growth hormone. And which is especially important if you're trying to heal from something. So I looked at the science and it was clear. And it turns out that, holding your breath repeatedly, not all day long, not sleep apnea. Sorry, that probably doesn't work because all of the stress hormones that you release in sleep apnea will probably overcome all the benefits of human growth hormone that you're releasing. And most breath holds, in sleep apnea, unless you have severe sleep apnea, they're going to be, less than 30 seconds. I had also heard from Dr. Mark Burhenna that when we suffer from sleep apnea or snoring or other sleep disordered breathing, we can inhibit the production of human growth hormone. The reason is that we are struggling to breathe throughout the night while we're sleeping. So we're constantly in this stress loop over and over and over. And in order to really release a profusion of human growth hormone, we need to be entering into those deep, deep stages of sleep, which we do not do when we're constantly waking up, breathing, struggling just to get a breath of air in and out. And it's something I need to explore a bit more, but there are a few studies showing that benefits of breath holding.
What was the Lance Armstrong thing? What was he taking? Can you remember? He was taking some sort of hormone.
He was drawing blood, and then, and this is my understanding, and then he was intravenously taking his own blood, right? So again, when he had lower oxygen, and so what he was trying to do is build more red blood cells, so he could carry more oxygen. So that's what he was doing. I'm not sure. I need to check this out. I haven't read this in a long time. But if he was trying to stimulate more EPO, and you can do that with breath holding and with breath control practices as well. And EPO is what is released from, I believe, your bone marrow, which helps you build more red blood cells.
If you had, I mean, maybe you know the answer actually, but if you had to guess, if not, why do you think the breath holding would stimulate more growth hormone? Would there be some sort of evolutionary benefit to that, do you think, or is it a byproduct?
I don't know. That's a great question, and honestly, I just don't know. We can sit here and hypothesize. I think that the body is, and so why don't we, right? I think that the body is reactive. It's built with all of these support mechanisms that if you do one thing wrong, it compensates by doing another thing. And if you're constantly holding your breath, then maybe it's thinking you aren't getting enough oxygen. And the way to buffer against that would be to create more red blood cells, which can carry more oxygen. And we know that this is what happens at altitude, right? You go up to altitude, you can build blood. That's why athletes go up to altitude. So when you are holding your breath at sea level, or when you're not at a very significant elevation, then I imagine it allows you to build more blood. And that's what studies have shown. That's why people practice this breath holding.
Yeah, incredible. Congratulations on the BBC Maestro course. I finished it this morning. Loved it. Highly recommend people check that out. It is a treasure trove of breath goodies and geeky breathness, which I love. So thank you so much. And I loved you guiding the exercises as well. That was a real treat. So big thank you for that. In there, you talked about exhales, and I think it's Carl Stowe. And you said something really interesting around everyone's talking about take a deep breath. You know, let's learn how to do all this stuff. People aren't talking about the other side of it. So can you just share a bit more about what's going on with exhales?
Yeah, I wrote about Stowe in the book, and this was one of the craziest pulmonauts I found of all the pulmonauts. This guy who was a choral conductor, who then ended up teaching emphysemics how to breathe better and rehabilitated them completely, and then went on to teach Olympic runners how to breathe better, and saxophonists and asthmatics, on and on and on. And Stowe was all about exhalation, especially with people with emphysema. What they do is, or any other COPD, they inhale. That's how they breathe, right? And so they're just packing air upon air upon air upon air, but they're not exhaling fully. If you don't exhale fully, you aren't able to take a big, deep, enriching breath in. So he found a lot of these people, a lot of the people, like people who are considered normal, their diaphragms are stuck in this spot where, because they're constantly inhaling without exhaling right. And what they really need to do, the diaphragm is what sits below the lungs, allows us to inhale and exhale, right? In order to really get a deep breath, you have to allow the diaphragm to ascend before it can descend properly. So this is what he taught people to do. And I was absolutely blown away that these people who were literally left for dead in the hospital with emphysema were able to walk away, live normal lives from learning how to exhale, from breathing normally. When Stowe left the hospital system, all of his therapies were forgotten. And still today, we're doing the same treatments with emphysemics that we did 70 years ago. So it's mind-boggling to me.
And I remember reading it in the book a couple of years ago in your book, and then it left my mind until you spoke about it on the Maestro course as well. So it's like, yes, exhales. Why are we not talking about that?
Yeah. And I've talked to a lot of respiratory therapists, a lot of PTs. I said, here is how you do this thing. This is the general premise. You can find your way in through various ways of teaching people how to exhale. There isn't only one way to do it. There's so many different ways. So why don't you take this and bring this into your clinics? It's free. It's available for everyone. From what I've seen, no one's done anything, which is just, it's insane that all of these people with COPD are not getting simple, free things that will allow them to significantly improve their condition. So I can only do so much. I try to put the information out there, and I hope that lesson in the BBC course will sort of kick people in the butt to start to treat these people in a different way.
Yeah, and just for my simple brain to try and understand what's going on there, is it something like, because we're never letting the diaphragm ever get back into its reset position, it's always in like a weird tenseness, and so it's just not fulfilling its destiny of how the diaphragm should be? Why is that so important for it to go all the way back up again, do you think?
You're exactly right? So it's inhibited. So it is, when you're constantly breathing air upon air, you're just keeping the diaphragm in the same spot. It's able to go down a little bit, but it's not able to really flex up and down. It's not able to have proper diaphragmatic movement. And what we know, what happens when you don't have that movement, not only are you making it so that you have to keep breathing over and over and over again, faster and faster, just to get oxygen into your bloodstream, but you are also inhibiting your organs from functioning properly, because You need that pressure, that easy massage on the organs for them to purge lymph fluid, for them to purge toxins, which is why so many people with gut issues, with IBD and so many other problems, they most often are breathing in this very dysfunctional way. So their organs and their stomach and their intestines aren't able to get that proper massage, so they're not able to work properly. So there's so many reasons to taking fluid, soft, easy, deep breaths.
Yeah, no, beautiful. You just mentioned that the D word there, the dysfunction. I've heard you talk about this a couple of times on the Maestro course, but also I think on Diary of the CO. I think you said something around 95% of the population might have some element, and you explained it really well around it being a scale, and some people being at one end and be the. But how would you get to that number of 95? Is that a specific study or a combination?
This is by talking to hundreds and hundreds of researchers and scientists and elite trainers of athletes and more over years and years and years. There is not one study that says that. What there are thousands of studies showing that 10% of the population has asthma, very dysfunctional breathing, 50% snores, 20% has sleep apnea, 60% of kids have cardiorespiratory dysfunction, on and on and on. And so there's, within those, a lot of people who have asthma have sleep apnea, right? So we're never going to be able to go out and do a survey of the entire population. But if you spend enough time looking at these numbers and talking to people deeply in this field, you realize it is the vast majority of people on the planet. I said in the book 90%. I have bumped that up to 95 after talking to so many more people. And you would think that people like weightlifters, Olympic runners, UFC fighters, boxers, you think these are going to be the best breathers in the world. Sometimes they're more dysfunctional than the guy walking down the street who looks completely normal. I mean, it's basically everybody. How many people have chronic congestion as well?
Yeah. Yeah, I've had the great fortune to work with a few athletes now as a breath coach, and when we start to measure things like Brian McKenzie's exhale or Bolt or control pause, it has been quite revealing actually that they're big, fit, strong people, but actually have some issues with their breathing. You mentioned sleep apnea. I've done a little bit of a deep dive into this, and I've been looking for a few clients around breathing exercises they can do, because not always, but they tend to have a decent CO2 tolerance because they're holding their breath. And I've heard a couple of things or read a couple of things around different breathing exercises where you'll pronounce a vowel or make a K sound and swallow. Have you come across any studies, evidence, or spoke to anybody about breathing exercises people with sleep apnea, particularly where their throats are kind of collapsing?
Yeah. So there's two specific areas to look at. It is the rhythm in which you are breathing, and this is something Patrick McEwen told me about years ago, and he has since published a study on this. So if you are accustomed in the daytime to constantly breathing too much, you tend to carry that breathing pattern into your sleep. So you tend to breathe too much in sleep. What he has found, this is still a little controversial, but what he has found by training hundreds and hundreds of people with sleep apnea to breathe more slowly, to breathe less, is they tend to carry this respiratory rate, these breathing habits, into their sleep, and thus have significantly less sleep apnea. He showed me this trick. He's like, try to breathe heavy through your mouth and make a snoring sound, right? Really easy to do. Now try to breathe very slowly in and out through your nose at a very easy rhythm and try to make that snoring sound. It's impossible to do. So he thinks that the flow of air coming into the airway can really affect our incidence of snoring and sleep apnea. So that's the one side. It's the flow. The other side is the structural, right? It's the pipe. And so many of us work out different areas of our bodies, but we don't work out our airways. So by doing these myofunctional exercises, they're called oral myofunctional exercises, oral pharyngeal exercises, all terrible names. All they are is exercises for your tongue and your mouth. And this allows for those soft tissues that are becoming flabby to firm up, just like any other part of your body would be firming up if you're working it out. And there's been several studies showing that this can be significantly effective for people with both snoring and sleep apnea. There aren't enough studies, I don't think, but there are several. I think I found about 6 or 7 that showing just doing these mouth exercises. So if you combine those mouth exercises with the slower and less breathing, what's it going to harm? Nothing. You're going to be a better breather. You have a more toned mouth. Will it fix all of your sleep apnea and snoring? I have no idea because everyone's different, but it can only help, right? For some people, it could help tremendously. For others, maybe just a little bit. But for me, it's worth the bother.
Yeah, for sure. No, I love that. Since we've last caught up, which was in Costa Rica a couple of years ago, and I don't know where, well, a year and a half ago, I don't know where time's going, I've become obsessed with coherence breathing. It's become like my favorite thing now to do. It's a daily practice, do it with all the people that I work with. And so I'd just love to get your thoughts a little bit more on this in terms of not necessarily the going down slow and the CO2 benefits that you're getting, but more what else is going on? Because I've heard things about the heart syncs up with the brain. You can see EKG, ECG, I think, or it might be the right terms, but I've got those wrong. There's stuff around blood flow. There's the chap, I forget his name now, the scientist that came up with the term. He says around a wine bottle's worth of blood flow goes to the brain with each exhale, and that's doing something with some waves. So I wonder if you could just demystify a little bit of this coherence breathing about what else is going on with it, why it's so lovely.
Yeah, so this is definitely one of my favorite, if not my favorite, breathing technique. And the reason is it's so simple. Anyone can do it anywhere. You can practice this all the time. There's no such thing, from what I've seen, of doing this too much. There are problems with not doing it enough because you're not able to breathe coherently. So what coherent breathing is it's just inhaling and exhaling at a rate from anywhere to 4 breaths to around 7 to 8 breaths per minute. And the reason why there is a range there, because depending on your age, kids breathe more than adults, right? And some people are more comfortable breathing less air than other people. So you have to find that breathing pattern, which for most people is right in the middle of that 4 to 8, right? It's right at around 5 to 6 breaths per minute, which is about 5 to 6 seconds in and 5 to 6 seconds out. So again, this is for most people, not for everyone. And when you do this, and you can see this if you're looking at your heart rate variability in a real-time readout, you watch what happens to your heart rate, which lowers, your blood pressure will normalize. By normalize, I mean that people with low blood pressure will see their blood pressure rise up to a normal level, and people with high blood pressure often see their blood pressure decrease. And they've also looked at the brain, what happens to the brain. And there's this synchronicity of different areas in the brain, the synchronizing. And these different brain waves tend to go into the alpha stage, these stages that are considered to be more associated with levels of deep meditation or focus. So there is a whole bunch of different things that happen to your body, not just with your blood oxygen levels, but all across your body when you're breathing at a rate that is at peak efficiency. And that's what resonance or coherence really means, that something is operating at peak efficiency.
I heard from our mutual friend, Tom Granger, who wrote Draw Breath, saying that there's a theory that maybe humans used to breathe at this rate many eons ago, and we've just been speeding up ever since. Have you come across anything anywhere in the literature about that?
If only we could go back in time and test that. But we can't. What we can do is read ancient scripts, which is what I spent a few years doing. And it looked like our ancients used to breathe significantly less than we did. The Bon Buddhists believe that breathing at a rate of around 7 breaths per minute was the key to proper breathing. And if you look at the ancient Chinese, they were breathing at a rate of about 8 breaths per minute, 9 breaths per minute, which is great. If you consider what is normal today, 12 to 18 breaths per minute, I think that's way too much. And just 50 years ago, what was considered normal was 8 to 12. So you see what's happening. Maybe next year it's going to be 18 to 30 breaths per minute because we become a population of hyperventilators. You don't need to breathe that often. It's so inefficient for most people.
Yeah. I was talking to a doctor the other day. He was a leukemia specialist, just happened to be at a party I was at. I was fascinated. He was talking about the levels of leukemia country versus country and how they were different. Like Japan's really low and West is really high. Have you seen anything around respiratory rates country to country? Have you ever gone into that level of detail?
I spent a few months working with a research assistant trying to find this, and there's just no good data. You can look back in history, which is what I did. I think I found a dozen studies showing that people in the 30s and 40s and 50s were breathing significantly less than we were, according to these studies. You know, I guess the best thing that you could do is look at the few populations that have not been industrialized, right? The HASDA, you could look at them and look at how they're breathing, and they don't have high blood pressure, they don't have heart disease. And from what I've seen, they breathe significantly less than we do. They're not hyperventilators, they're not mouth breathers. So just look to nature, right? Look at other animals that haven't been completely destroyed by industrialization. Look at how they're breathing through the nose, in and out, softly, rhythmically. That's how we should be breathing as well.
You know, I've seen this around a little bit on the internet. Breathe less, live longer. And we know all the benefits, but do you think there is something so basic in slowing our breath rate down might actually be a longevity market in itself by slowing the heart rate down? Hey, let's just step away for James for 1 second to let you know about my brand new newsletter called Breathwork in a Blink. Now, I took a pause recently and I thought about the emails that I was sending out. And I thought, what would I really want to get? If it came into my inbox, what would I really read and not unsubscribe or ignore? And this is what bore Breathwork in a Blink. And so it's a 5-minute newsletter that comes out every Friday. And in there are just a couple of key sections that you can get through in 5 minutes. And I give you 5 things that you might want to explore. For example, we talk about the breathing exercise of the week, and I'll link you to one of my breathing techniques and why that exercise is beneficial for you. We'll talk about podcast of the week. It may be one of mine, it may be another. We did a Wim Hof newsletter the other day, and I sent people to Dr. Rhonda Patrick one, where it was really great on the Wim Hof science. We also talk about what's going on inside the community. So we have a private community, and sometimes some really interesting things come out of there, which I want to share with all of you as well. We also have a wild card section, and we have the studies that I'm going through. So you've got 5 things, some of which may be of interest to you. We've had wonderful feedback. It's completely free. You can unsubscribe anytime, and you can click the link down below to get onto the newsletter. And I look forward to sharing Breathwork in a Blink with you this Friday. Thanks so much. Let's get back on with Mr. James Nestor. Cheers.
Well, that's what BKS Iyengar said. He's like, a yogi's life is not measured by his days, but by his breaths. So I think everything that we know, that all this cascade of benefits we get from breathing slower, breathing less, breathing deeply, all of the stress that releases, all of the oxygen we get more easily, it makes perfect sense to me that the slower, more rhythmically you breathe, the easier it is for your body to live longer. There will never be a study on this at all, but just on paper, that makes a lot of sense. It can't hurt. I'll put it that way.
Okay. Love it. Vital, I think you called it, is it the Framingham study I heard you mention on Stephen Bartlett's podcast? And is that vital capacity? So could you just explain the Framingham study and what our lung capacity's got to do with our longevity?
This was a 70-year-long longitudinal study looking at about 5,200 different people in Massachusetts. And what they found was the clearest marker of lifespan was lung size and lung function. So the sooner your lungs shrink up, the more disease they get, the sooner you're going to die. And the good thing is about lung function and lung size is we can influence this at any age. We can do this by breathing properly and by doing stretches, right? What is yoga but a technology and exercise of stretching and breathing to inhibit that downward spiral of lung deterioration, which happens as we grow older. After the age of around 30, our lungs start getting smaller and smaller and smaller. We can reverse that with proper breathing techniques.
Now, is it the actual sacs themselves that are getting smaller and or tighter rib cage, weaker diaphragm, or is it all of the above?
It's all of those things. So from what I know, it's not like the alveoli are getting smaller or getting less. It's not at that scale. I could be wrong about that, or the bronchioles are getting less. But it has a lot to do with the bones. The bones become brittle. They become less flexible, right? And and when that happens, when we start losing bone mass, our posture gets crappy. We start shrinking, which is what happens when we get older. And we lose the ability to truly inflate our lungs properly when we take a deep breath. But just like anything else, this is easily reversible, not only by adopting proper breathing habits, but just by exercising, right? Mild to moderate exercise helps to stem off that deterioration in our lungs. And I think you need to add nasal breathing to that as well, so you don't constantly expose your lungs to everything in the outside environment.
Yeah. Just wanted to link back to the coherence one last time. Any ideas why heart rate variability would increase with coherence breathing? And would that be different to box breathing, do you know?
Yeah, we know why it increases, because when you are breathing coherently, your heart rate is syncing up with your respiratory rate, which sends your brain signals that it is calm. And so your brain starts locking in at a consistent signal as well. That's what I was talking about, those different waves, that coherence that happens in your brain, right? That synchronous firing of these neurons by rhythmically breathing in this certain way. So I think it's very scientifically, it's very clear. They know why why our bodies adopt these different patterns and why this is so beneficial. And this isn't controversial at all. And someone can get a heart rate variability monitor and look at what is happening to your heart rate variability when you breathe at this coherent rate. And you can see it right up on your screen. So no one's making this up.
Talk to me a little bit about nasal hair, because we love pulling those hairs out. So what's going on when we've got more dense nasal hair versus those that rip all those hairs out the nose?
A lot of people love pulling them out. Maybe some people should, because when they start growing out, and attaching to your mustache, maybe not a good look. But I'm a fan of these nasal hairs, because there was one study that showed that the density of nasal hair is indicative of asthma risk. So people who have a denser amount of nasal hair, according to this study, will have less chance of having asthma and less severe symptoms, which to me makes sense, because if you are breathing through a lot of nasal hairs, you're breathing more slowly, right? It's forcing you to breathe more slowly, and all those hairs are catching a bunch of things that could cause you to have an allergic reaction. So that makes sense. And beyond that, I mean, they're there for a reason. We didn't evolve to have nasal hair for no reason at all. They're there to catch a bunch of crap that's in the air and to help capture some moisture and to help protect us. So, if you have excessive nasal hair, you might want to clip a little bit of that, but do you want to remove all of it? Maybe not. I'm not an expert in nasal hair. Maybe one day I will be, but as of now, I think it's probably a good idea to leave a lot of that in there.
Yeah, sounds like a good idea. So talking about the schnoz then for a little minute, everyone seems to be fascinated by nasal nitric oxide. It's the big thing. Everyone's talking about it. I've got a couple of videos on YouTube. They've just been going crazy. My understanding was and we talk about the humming in a second and the keys and stuff, but my understanding was when we hum or we have nasal nitric oxide, it's only in the lungs for a couple of seconds and it's helping a bit of vasodilation, opening everything up. But then I've also heard things around can improve sex life. And I know there's probably vasoconstriction, vasodilation that's happening anyway with CO2. That's probably slightly separately, but is there any benefits linked to humming and sexual health other than the vasoconstriction of CO2? Is there anything for
I
nitric
don't think
oxide?
anyone has studied humming and sexual potency, because who's gonna fund that? Maybe, the porn
Yeah.
industry. But and this is the problem. It's just like there's no market for studies like that. There's no product that you can develop. The outcome is hum more. We can tell people to do that because we know the science is very clear that increasing that nitric oxide, which is only going to be bioavailable for a very short amount of time, but what it does in that amount of time is really important, right? It helps really open things out. It helps kill viruses and bacteria. And what those erectile dysfunction drugs do is they dilate blood vessels by allowing your body to produce more nitric oxide. So you can produce a profusion of nitric oxide by humming. And I learned this from our mutual friend, Tom Granger. He's just like, humming at certain frequencies is so important. I said, what are you talking about? I looked it up, and he's entirely right. So at around 120 hertz, that's about a B2 on a piano. I think it's around that's supposed to produce the most nitric oxide. So I got some flack from people who said, listen, I'm smaller. I can't hum a note that low. What does this mean to me? If you are smaller and can't hum a note that low, then the resonant frequency of your sinus cavities will naturally be higher. So my hunch is you could be humming maybe a D or maybe an E or maybe an F, and it would be doing the same thing. So anything in that range, and you don't have to just sit in a corner of your room and hum a B. Hum anything in that, hum your favorite song, put it in the key of B, and see what it does for you. Report back. See how your potency in bed improves. I got a question for you, Mike. Yeah, here it is. The question is, why, when people are about to make sweet, sweet love, do they sit and kiss, start nasal breathing naturally, and start, maybe this is an evolutionary adaptation to get you in the mood to do it. Who knows?
Also, when you're meeting strangers, like I do it a lot when I'm just talking to people, like verbal nods, we call it, don't we? So do you think there's something else going on there, just human to human contact?
So
Not
much
necessarily
we
sexual.
don't know. Yeah. And you, in some cultures, do that a lot more. So I guess no matter how you can get it, it's a good thing to be getting that nitric oxide in the nose. You want to do it before sex. You want to do it when you're agreeing with someone. You want to do it while humming a song, whatever.
Yeah, and I think, did you say there's a 6-fold increase just by nose breathing versus mouth? And that made me think, do we get some nasal nitric, not nasal, but do we get some nitric oxide through the mouth? Or have I misunderstood that?
Not a lot. I think that there is some produced, but it's not a lot. And I didn't include this in the book, but I went to Sweden to the Karolinska Institute and talked to the guy who did this study. And he said that 6-fold increase of just nasal breathing without humming. They did a bunch of weird research to do. They found people with tracheostomies, and they put nitric oxide sensors in the holes of their throat. He's like, we wouldn't be able to do this today, but they did it 20 years ago. So, and then humming, when you're humming, right, you're breathing through your nose almost always. That increases the nitric oxide to nasal inhales 15-fold. So this is a huge difference. And there was one study that showed this guy with awesome study, guy with chronic rhinitis, hummed for 10 minutes 4 times a day and completely got rid of his chronic rhinitis, which is why I am working on doing a citizen science study. Hopefully we can get 100,000 people with chronic rhinitis, have control groups, follow the same protocol, right, and see what it does for you. These things are impossible to get funded, so we're trying to do this in a different way. And there are no negative side effects, right, to have someone do this. It's not like taking a drug. It's like, oh, sorry, now you're blind, right? You're only going to get benefits of humming. Will it help with your rhinitis or sinusitis? No one knows. We got to study it, and that's what I hope to be doing in this next year.
Yeah, I forget who said this to me, like a doctor on the podcast, saying that during COVID, people were humming, doctors were humming while doing their rounds, thanks to your book. They referenced you in your book. So how wonderful that is. They were getting this extra protection.
That's amazing. And, you know, I learned the vast majority of the information I learned from the book are from doctors, right? I talked with doctors, hundreds and hundreds of doctors. So it's interesting. I'm just taking their information they told me, regurgitating it back to them. There was so much amazing research looking at nitric oxide and COVID and people who had just gotten COVID and how incredibly effective it was. And what was so insane to me is, did this ever make it into the hospitals? Did this ever make it into the knowledge that the general public had about how to help yourself if you had acute symptoms of COVID? No. And I don't know why that is. Maybe because nitric oxide is pretty cheap to produce. Maybe because you can't patent it, right? But Louis Ignarro, I talked with him at length about this. And the science, he won a Nobel Prize for his work in nitric oxide in the 90s. And he was stunned by how everyone seemed to be ignoring this. And so it makes sense, knowing that we have the science and the research showing that when you have exogenous nitric oxide, you deliver it to people with COVID, it does all of these amazing things to the lungs, to the infection, to the oxygen levels, that producing your own would only help you. And it also calms your nervous system, right? So humming should be prescribed.
For sure. I spoke to Ted Belfour a couple of years ago, and he was calling it the third gas, you know, after the CO2 and O2. And he was talking about a box breathing technique where you would exhale on the mouth to not waste any any nitric oxide, and then you'd inhale it back. And then obviously the humming is letting something out the nose. Have you come across the most effective thing? Is humming just the most effective thing to get more nitric oxide?
Ted was such an amazing guy. I learned so much from him. But as far as I know, no one's measured it, right? If you are going to be making these claims, it's like, exhale through the mouth and not the nose because of this or that. Cool. Let's measure it, right? And see what it says. It's not that hard to do. Get 10 people and measure it. And from what I've seen, there haven't been measurements. So what you're left with are hypotheses, which is fine, you know, but this is the one thing that bothers me about some people, and it has nothing to do with TED, but in the breathwork community, making these claims that are not substantiated with simple measurements. So I have not seen anything in regards to that. I think the tried and true humming, and you can hum along with box breathing, you can hum along with coherent breathing, I think is so powerful. When you inhale for 6 and you, it's sort of a double plus whammy when you do that. Have there been studies showing that it's more effective than XXX? No, there haven't. And maybe one day there will be, but we know there are no negative side effects. It can only benefit you.
Love it. Let's talk a little bit about biomes, microbiomes, nasal microbiome, lung microbiome. Did you go down that route at all and understand what's damaging it, what's making it better?
I haven't. And this is something that's on the docket for next year. I've heard this from several people. I heard it from NIAC as well. It makes perfect sense to me. The gut microbiome, it's now everyone's talking about it. 10 years ago, no one had ever heard of it, right? Including researchers thought it was completely sketchy. Now people are talking about the oral microbiome, the microbiome in the mouth, how you shouldn't use mouthwash because it kills it off, and this can lead to greater risk of heart disease and all these problems, which I believe is completely true. Dr. Mark Burhenna talks all about this. Now people are starting to talk about the nasal microbiome. I won't even call myself, definitely not an expert in that subject, not even a neophyte. I need to explore it a lot more. But what I have heard from a few people is that it had been shown in several studies that using iodine in the nose, once you had a COVID infection or once you have other serious viral or bacterial infections, is extremely effective. There's this stuff that you can actually, I forget the name of it right now, that you spray, and it's an iodine solution you put in your nose. Using that too much can kill your nasal microbiome and according to some people, lead to other issues. But again, I'm just at my beginning of understanding and appreciating that, and I'll get right to it in 2024.
Can't wait to hear about it. Yeah, because I always wonder about the neti potting, and it's like some people do it daily, and I always feel like that can't be good daily because we've not evolved to wash our nose daily, surely.
I might disagree with you on
Okay.
that because you're talking about, one is a very harsh chemical that kills things. Iodine is designed to kill things, right? If you are just using a saline solution, which your body naturally creates the same saline solution, right? You're trying to mimic the pH of the fluids in your body, which is why you add that salt, which is why you put that solution in your eye and it doesn't hurt, right? I don't think, but again, I don't know of any studies. I
Yeah.
don't think that you would be really hurting your nasal microbiome doing that. You were just helping to cleanse it. I'm a huge fan of neti potting, especially when I'm traveling, I'm on tour, and I'm stuck in icky airplanes for 17 hours at a time. It's the first thing I do when I get to a hotel. So I use a neti pot, and I've also been traveling with these little sprays.
Yeah.
So I hope someone explores this more. I'm
Yeah.
gonna write myself a little
Please.
note on it. But I can't imagine that would
Okay.
have too much of an
It's not
effect.
destructive. Yeah, because I guess our hunter-gatherer ancestors didn't need to wash their noses out because they lived in this lovely, clean environment. We've created this crap and we're having to clean it out, I guess. So.
They were outside all the time. There were no
All the time.
doors, okay? There were no closed windows in a Marriott, right? So they were outside they did not need it. And so not only were they not exposed to pollutants all the time, but they weren't exposed to the level of viruses and bacteria because they were in an outside environment. We've chosen to live in an industrialized environment. I love windows. I love doors. I love the little heater at my feet right now because it's super cold outside. But if you do that, you have to acknowledge that not everything in this environment is working for your benefit. It is killing us. This industrialized environment has helped us live these long, wonderful lives, and then we benefit in so many ways, but it's also killing us with toxins. I know I sound like an aluminum hat wearer saying this, but it's very clear the toxins in our food, the toxins in our air, the toxins in our water are not good for us. So you have to take precautions against that.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I've gone down that route quite a lot over the last couple of years. It's fascinating and terrifying at the same time. Have you looked much into the phenomenon of earthing/grounding? Clint Ober's done some work on this. There was a few bits on, and I got a bit lost on this, around when we're touching the planet and we're charged in a certain way, the oxygen molecules are charged in a different way, there's an attraction going on. What have you seen, if anything, in this whole grounding related to breathing?
You're going to be reading all about it if you choose in a couple of years when I get done with stuff I'm working on right now. So it's that is one very small element of a project I'm working on right now. It is so confusing. Just like you were confused, I was confused. There are all these people making all these claims that are completely baseless. Then there are real researchers doing real measurements, making real claims. And then there's controversy about grounding through your home outlet. Is that advantageous to you? Or are you picking up all of this extra electricity and static electricity and exposing yourself to it? There are people that say this on both sides. So just like breathing, it's so confusing. So I've spent years, because I was interested in it, casually researching it, and believe I've finally found the kernel of truth behind this stuff. I'll just tell you right now that there appears to be sometimes profound benefits of connecting with the earth that are measurable, clearly measurable in a wild and natural environment. It gets a little more murky when you are in a city grounding through a home outlet that is exposed to all of this different frequencies and electricity in the ground. And so I'm trying to really peer through that. And it's great being a journalist because I'm not selling anything in grounding. I'm just curious, and I'm going to follow where the truth leads me. And everyone's pitching their different stuff. It's like, if you can measure it and repeat it over and over, then you can convince me. and so that's what I've been exploring. But I think there's something there. I really do. And I think it's been terribly explained to the public, and hopefully I can help change that.
Cool. Well, I've got an earthy sheet on my bed, and I'm touching an earthing mat now. Should I throw them away, or what's
I
going
got
on?
all that stuff as well.
Yeah.
And I
Okay.
measured it. I'm like, this is really working, right? It's
Okay.
really working. However, what I
Uh-huh.
did not measure was all of the other stuff that is
The
coming
dirty
through that
electric.
outlet.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
vast majority of people I've talked to says it does nothing. Okay.
Yeah.
Vast majority. But I've also talked to probably the two smartest, most sophisticated electrical engineers on the planet right now. People who are so on this, they're rebuilding Tesla's machine and sending wireless electricity around their house, like so on another level. And they say, oh, that scares the hell out of me. And so they're the ones with instrumentation that can measure what's actually coming out of your outlet. So I think it
Okay.
depends on where you are. I think
Sure.
if you're in a 30-story building in downtown Manhattan, probably, I don't know for sure. Don't come after me, grounding people. Probably, I'd look into that a little deeper. If you were living alone on solar energy in a desert or on an
Yeah.
island, it's probably 100% cool. But it
Yeah.
all depends, right?
Yeah. It sounds like get your shoes and socks off and go and stand on the grass is probably the best thing you can do.
Best thing you could
Yeah.
for so many other
Yeah.
reasons. Go to the beach and get your feet
Sure.
wet with salt water and walk around if you want the true power of grounding. We know that's tried and true all the way. It's the home stuff is and I know I'm going to get a bunch of shit from people from saying this. And I'm talking to the people who manufacture this stuff, and I'm listening to them, right? I have no agenda here. I need more science, more research to convince myself living in a city that is 100% safe. And it could be, and I hope it is, because that will make it truly accessible to everybody.
Love it. Love it. I mean, the idea of us disconnecting sort of 60 or 70 years ago, putting rubber shoes on and touching your cell phone while it's plugged into the outlet, measuring the ampage on your body, and you can see those things. It can't be good. Can't be good having like a load of amps in your body. So it makes sense to discharge, connect. So I look forward to hearing more about that, James. That's fascinating. Yeah. Cool. So a couple of last questions. CO2 tolerance. Please see if you can help me understand this a little bit more. Slow, light, gentle breathing, breath holds, bolt scores, controlled pauses, maximum breathlessness tests. We start to play with our chemoreceptors and we start to be able to increase this. There's another element here which is around mindset and being able to relax. I've spent a lot of time with Tom Zitas, the first human to hold his breath for more than 10 minutes in water. He's taught me so much. So you've got that element. Then I've spent some time with people that are doing conscious connected breathing every single day. They don't do any breath holds and their scores are off the charts. And I don't understand how you can hyperventilate and have really good CO2, or I think they have good CO2 tolerance. And then the last bit of this, I get the Wim Hof stuff. You hyperventilate, you hold your breath, you get 3 minutes. But the way I've always looked at that is you blow off so much CO2. All you're doing is you've got that ability to give you some time before it gets back to that limit you were going to get to anyway if you just held your breath without hyperventilating. So can you demystify a bit of this for me? I just don't get how these two opposing methods are playing with our tolerance.
You said you were going to ask me one question. You asked me 5. Now I'm going to see if I can remember all of
Okay,
these.
I can.
The
Yeah.
first one about chemoreceptors and CO2 tolerance. This is what Dr. Justin Feinstein is deeply exploring right now. He has found that people with anxiety, people with asthma, people with agoraphobia, people with fear-based disorders can hold their breath a very limited amount of time. And their exhaled CO2 in their breath is very, very low, which indicates they are constantly in a state of hyperventilation. They are in this state because they associate slow breathing or breath holding with this loss of control, with having a panic attack, with having an asthma attack. Think of what happens before someone has a panic attack. So they're trying to stop themselves from having that feeling of losing control. So they have become habituated to constantly overbreathe. And this has been research for more than 100 years. What happens with these people is they have such a low tolerance for CO2 after breathing so much for so long that even increasing the CO2 a little sets them off on a panic attack or an asthma attack. So with these populations, you very slowly have to teach them how to breathe less. It's very methodical and very slow, which is why you don't have them hold their breath for 30 seconds, for a minute, for 2 minutes right off the bat. You have them do their coherent breathing at a rate of around 3 seconds in, 3 seconds out. Is that comfortable for you? Let's try it 4 seconds in, 4 seconds out. After a couple weeks, let's go to 5. This is what I tried to do in the BBC Maestro course, because I didn't want to immediately take people in and be like, everyone, we're going to coherent breathe 6 seconds in, 6. It doesn't work that way. So that's what's happening. They're so oversensitized to CO2 that because they've been hyperventilating, and the way to reverse that and get them to chill out is to breathe less, right? And to get that CO2 threshold up. What the CO2 therapy does is you take this big bolus, and a lot of the researchers believe this just helps reset them right off the bat, right? This can save weeks and weeks of them not showing up for the breathwork exercises because they're too stressed out or too busy. And that's what the studies have shown. It helps reset the brain and probably helps reset the chemoreceptors with just this huge amount, which is why a lot of people, I certainly have this reaction. You have a freaking panic attack because your body, you lose control, but you become more accustomed to having that panic attack, which is by the 3rd or 4th or 5th time you do it, you're like, your body starts to understand what's happening, and your body wants to keep you alive. So it starts compensating in different ways. It helps allow that threshold of CO2 to rise up a little bit. That's very technical, but that's the first question you asked.
Conscious connected breathers, why are they getting the benefits then when they're huffing and puffing all day? I just can't get how that... So forget Wim Hof for a second, just these guys that are huffing and puffing a lot.
You forgot question 2, which is Tom Seastas, which is such an awesome...
Yes.
He's such an awesome
guy. He's such a good guy, isn't he?
Yeah. I love Tom. That guy is solid
He's
gold
the nicest guy.
The whole way through.
You'll love this.
And he's an amazing breath holder, right? I've learned a lot from him as well. If you see him, anyone out there, tell him I said hi. So there's another way of resetting your chemoreceptors, right? And being able to tolerate more CO2 by doing these breath holds, starting with a minute, if you're able to, and it does put you in a panic attack, right? So then going to 2 minutes, then going to 3 minutes. So that's another way of doing it if you don't want to inhale CO2. So these people who are these conscious breathers, right? These people who do Wim Hof method, who do Sudarshan Kriya, these vigorous hyperventilation techniques, which you have done, Mike, which I have done, I think they're great. And what I think they're doing is they are allowing you to blow off all that stress in a very short amount of time. So you're causing yourself to have this crazy respiratory rate, doing Kundalini breaths, whatever you want to do. Then when you're done with that, you're so chilled out. Your nervous system is so relaxed that your respiratory rate goes down, goes way down. And by having your respiratory rate go down and by breathing less, your CO2 levels naturally go up and you become comfortable with breathing less. That is what I think is happening. But I don't know any vigorous breathing technique. I have never done one that doesn't incorporate extremely fast breathing with extremely slow or breathing or with breath holds. I don't know of any of them. So unless there's one where you just sit, and unless it's holotropic breath work where you just breathe as hard as you can for 3 hours straight, but you walk away, even that, you don't do that every day, right? You'd be an idiot to do that every day. This is meant for, like, you have to prepare for it, all this. You walk away from that and you're just hardly breathing at all. That's my, what do you think about that? It's my...
I mean, that makes so much sense. That makes so much sense. Like you're blown off, you're resetting. I wasn't sure. I was like, well, how is there something around when we blow off so much CO2 and we do have that breath hold in Wim Hof and it goes up? Maybe it does go up above where you originally would have been set. Because
I think it does.
Yeah,
I think it does. When you start to hold your breath to 3 minutes, 4 minutes, 5 minutes, if you look at your blood sat, a lot of people have done this. They can get it down to 60% in the body, right? Even 50%. Brian McKenzie says he gets us down to 50%. Very dangerous if you don't know what you're doing, if you're not acclimated, if you haven't slowly acclimated your body. But this is all he does. Brian loves breath work. So if your blood sats are down that low, obviously there is so much CO2 in your body and you're tolerating it. So I'm pretty sure that's what's happening.
Interesting. What Tom taught me to, I was with him in Corfu and we were doing free diving, and he got me to a 3-minute 14 breath hold. I was about a minute before I got there, and it was 3 days, and it blew my mind. And he said the most interesting thing, he said he's tried all the emotions to improve his breath holds: anger, frustration, happiness. And he said joy gives him the longest breath holds. And the power of emotions, man, it's just it's incredible.
100%. And that's, if anyone is curious about free diving, the moment you get angry, the moment you get stressed, the moment you push it is the moment you should get out of the water and not go back in until you are filled with love and joy for this practice and for the ocean, for all the animals in it. That has been exactly my experience free diving. When I've gone, I'm stressed. I just got off a plane. I was like, stupid people forgot my luggage, just got all this. My free diving sucks. I'm in a bad mood when I go in there and give myself to the ocean and give with glee. I know that sounds a little cheesy, but it just changes everything. And that's another reason why, Tom, you want to learn how to hold your breath, everybody? Look up Tom. He's the master. Great guy. He'll show you.
Yeah. We've got a couple of podcasts with him on here, actually, so people can go. I'll link them down below. I've been lucky to ask him some questions. My last question is very cheesy, so please forgive me. You are marooned on a desert island, and you can only, for whatever weird reason, you can only bring one breathing exercise with you for the year you're on there. What breathing exercise is James Nestor bringing to this marooned desert island?
Well, it depends on what you call a breathing exercise. Is breathing through my nose, in and out through? Is that you consider that an exercise, or more of a technique?
It could be like you're doing breathe light. It could be coherence. So something like maybe we can brand a little, something we can give people to go, this would be the exercise.
I would love to have a more interesting answer for you, and I apologize in advance for just repeating what I've told you before, but it's coherent breathing, people. That's the one. Yeah. Once you learn to be an obligate nasal breather, the next thing you should do is learn how to do this coherent breathing and try to practice it a couple times a day. It's simple, it's free, it's so easy. From what I've seen, it is probably the most powerful breathwork technique.
Beautiful. Mr. James Nestor, it has been an absolute pleasure at round 3. Guys, please check out his Maestro course. It is phenomenal. James, any parting words for us?
Thanks for having me on again. And if everyone out there isn't sick to death of hearing me talk about this stuff, I will say one of the main reasons I keep doing this is because every time I speak in public, there's a line of people. They're crying, they're laughing, they're pissed off. They aren't getting this information anywhere. So I'm so grateful for you, Mike, for spreading the word. I'm going to keep spreading the word because I think the more people adopt these healthy breathing habits, it can make a significant impact on their health. So thanks again very much for having me on.
You're very welcome, and thank you for everything you do. Thanks for watching, everybody. Cheers, James. Thank you for sticking all the way through to the end of this podcast. That's it, 100 episodes. I never actually believed we would get there, and it feels really right that we had James again. So what I would love is this. What is one thing that you took away from this podcast? Pop that in the comments down below, because not only will that help you remember something to take action, it will also help somebody else reading those comments go, oh, I didn't know about CO2 in the house, or I didn't know about like CO2 for therapy, or I didn't know about the benefits of grounding. So maybe what's the one thing that stood out for you? Maybe something you're prepared to take action on. Pop that in the comments down below. If this podcast brought you value, please consider sharing it with a friend or family member or colleague. It's a couple of clicks of the thumb, and then you can send this off on WhatsApp or iMessage, and it might bring in some new listeners for the podcast, which means we grow and we can get James back and some other guests as well. And my Breathwork in the Blink newsletter is out now. So I asked myself, what email would I get and I wouldn't ignore or delete? And this is what bore Breathwork in the Blink. So it's 5 things in 5 minutes about breathwork, so you can explore in more detail. So There's some science in there. There's some breathing exercises. There's a podcast referencing something that week. There's a wild card section, and it's just a bit of fun, and it's an immense amount of value in a very, very short period of time for you. So if that sounds of interest to you, you can subscribe to Breathwork in the link down below. And as always, as you're probably aware, we always finish these podcasts with a breathing technique. And with James, oh my God, what breathing technique we're going to do? So we're going to do a 4-6 breathing technique. This is sometimes known as 4-6 yogic breath. We inhale for 4 seconds. We exhale for 6 seconds. A short inhale is easier for most people. A longer exhale is more relaxing. There's a study that shows that this is really good for reducing blood pressure, amongst other things as well. So we'll get on with that now. And again, think about what your one takeaway is from this podcast. Let us know in the comments. Come and join us on Breathwork in the Blink. And let's now begin and get ready for our 4-6 breathing. So just go ahead and close your eyes. Just start to notice your breath. Just start to soften your breath. Just start to relax the body. And in a second, we'll begin with the guided breath work. Thank you for being here for episode 100. Here's to the next 100 episodes. Inhale. Exhale. 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 Inhale.
Exhale. Exhale. Inhale. 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 Exhale. That's it, you're done. You're exactly where you need to be. For best results, practice daily. And if you're ready to take the next step and achieve true transformational change in your physical and mental health, then click on the link below and have a conversation with us to discuss whether or not one-on-one breath coaching would be a good fit for you. We will create a bespoke breathing plan based on your goals, your needs, and your breathing. We've helped people with incredible transformations and would love to meet you to discuss yours. Click on the link below and we'll speak soon. Thank you.